Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Todd Stephens, representing the 151st Legislative District in Montgomery County. Pennsylvania has a massive problem that has been ignored for far too long. Our roads and bridges are some of the oldest in the nation, and in many cases, they're showing their age. If the state picked up the tab to repair and replace them, it would break the budget. But continuing to put off the problem for another day is not a solution either. Joining me today to discuss the difficult issue of transportation funding is Barry Schoch, Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for taking the time today. I appreciate you being here.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Representative.
Absolutely. Could you just maybe go over for us a little bit, how significant is the transportation funding issue in Pennsylvania? What are our roads and bridges like?
Well, they're in fairly poor condition. And the reality is the system, while we inject about $2 billion of construction every year to take care of the system, maintain it, and upgrade it, we should be spending double that amount. So every year that we don't do that, every year we don't invest more, the problem gets a little worse. It's a little bit like having a credit card where you're paying the minimum balance and the principal is still there and the interest is building.
Sure.
That's the situation. We have the average age of our bridge, we own 25,000 bridges. The average age is 51 years old.
Wow.
We built a lot of new bridges, and yet that tells you for every new one, we got two that are 75 years old.
Yeah. Now, I think at the governor's budget address, he made mention of the number of school children that go over the bridges.
Yeah, millions of school children every day going across these bridges. So it's really a public safety issue. It's an economic competitiveness issue. When Secretary Walker gets companies coming to look at Pennsylvania, they'll go talk to him about the workforce, the geography, and then they always ask to talk to me. And they say, what's the condition of your bridges? What's the condition of your mass transit systems? Because they're worried about giving people and products around the state and being competitive. I
know in my district, right when I took office, there was a bridge that was structurally deficient. It was shut down to traffic just in one direction. And the inconvenience for the local businesses was huge. And I had a lot of business leaders contacting me as well as local residents with concerns there. Why do we have such a problem in terms of funding? Where are the issues here? What
part
causes
of it,
this?
you touched on your intro, part of it is we have one of the oldest systems in the nation. I mean, the Northeast was one of the first developed highway networks and mass transit systems because that's where the population was back in the 30s, 40s, 50s when all this stuff was built. Even the interstate system, which was largely built in the 50s and early 60s, started in the Northeast because that was the biggest population. So we have an old system. We have some of the worst weather you can possibly have, meaning you've got a heavy freeze-thaw cycle. We actually have the worst climatic conditions you could have. Freeze-thaw every day in the wintertime is very bad, very hard on pavements. Heavy truck traffic because the Keystone State, right? You can't get to the Northeast without passing through the Keystone State. We have the second most streams in the country next to Alaska. Of course, that means more bridges. Wow. Bridges per mile means higher cost than roadway. And then over the course of time, you probably are driving maybe the same make and model vehicle, perhaps by choice, that you had 5, 6, 10 years ago, but it gets more fuel efficient mileage than it did years ago. So today, the economy has been relatively flat. Vehicle miles traveled on a whole are about the same, but they're consuming less gasoline because of higher fuel mileage, so we get less revenue.
And maybe, could you just elaborate on that? Maybe explain for the viewers, you know, how does the revenue move from the consumer to the state? I mean, what are the mechanisms in place to fund our roads?
It's very much like other utilities. So if you have an electric bill at home, there's a flat charge to get access to the utility. Then there's a consumption charge. For us, you pay a driver's license fee and a registration fee. That's your access to the system. Basically, that allows you to drive on the roads. Then after that, you pay on the basis of how much gas you consume. It's a consumption charge, meaning you drive a lot, you buy a lot of gas, you pay more. So people that drive a lot pay more than those who pay little. So it's very similar to a utility bill like anything else. The problem is people are driving about the same as they did 5, 6 years ago, and we haven't changed the rates since 1997.
So this is a flat rate, not a percentage then of each gallon, a flat rate.
It doesn't matter whether the price is $4 a gallon or 3 1/4 a gallon, we get the same amount. And the reality is it hasn't changed since 1997, 16 years. So 16 years of flat revenue, actually declining revenue because of the fuel efficiency, and yet, like everything else, our costs are getting higher with inflation every year.
And I guess in addition, well, I was just going to say, in addition to the increased fuel efficiency, so government actually works against itself. It demands more fuel efficient cars at the federal level, but then that means a reduction in revenues available for road and bridge projects at the state level.
It's a little bit of a policy schizophrenia. I've been quoted at some of the hearings at the federal side is that the federal government's mandating, actually if you look to the future, they're mandating a 25% increase by the year 2016 in the fleet. By the time that makes it into everybody's cars turn over, people buy new cars, it might be 2020. We're forecasting that might cost us $500 million a year in revenue by 2020. $500 million.
Yeah.
That's the equivalent of like a 10-cent gas tax.
Sure, sure. And I guess in addition, you have the simple supply and demand of the higher the price of fuel, the fewer gallons people purchase, and therefore, again, less revenue.
And that works both in our favor in mass transit, meaning when the price gets closer to $4 a gallon, we actually see ridership going up on mass transit and at our carpool and van pool locations. But you're right. I mean, as the price has gone up, people are choosing to drive less, consuming less gasoline, and yet we still have the same demands for the system.
I think I read somewhere that Pennsylvania has more miles of state road than all the New England states combined. Is that right?
We do. It's a little bit of the nature of our system and the size of our geography, but it's also legislatively, counties don't own roads with very few exceptions here in Pennsylvania. For instance, down in Maryland, there's a lot of county-owned roadways. So here in Pennsylvania, the state owns the majority of our roadway miles compared to what other states do. Local government still owns 77,000 miles. We own 40,000. Townships and municipalities own 77,000. So it's not totally a state problem. It's just that we have a higher percentage of state-owned roads than most states do.
And in terms of the funding, much of the funding for the local road projects ends up coming from the state through that fuel tax as well. Am I right?
It does. A good portion of the money that they use comes from that because, frankly, all they have is property taxes as revenue otherwise. So they fund most of their roadway improvements through the same liquid fuels tax that we use for our state system.
That makes sense. And I've heard from some of my local municipal leaders as well saying, hey, we need to do something on transportation funding. There are a couple proposals out there. Could you just maybe give us a brief overview of what they are and what their cost would be?
The governor in his budget address proposed uncapping the oil company franchise tax, which is basically the one component of our liquid fuels tax, doing so gradually over a 5-year period, starting off by cutting 2 cents of the retail tax, the tax at the pump. That would have yielded about $1.8 billion by year 5 to inject back into local roads and bridges, to our state system, and to public transportation, all the modes of transportation, rail, aviation, et cetera. The Senate came back with a proposal that's $2.5 billion over 3 years, also uncapping the oil company franchise tax and then adding in indexing back to 1997, all those fees I talked about, driver's license fees, registration fees, et cetera, as well as I think surcharges on moving violations, meaning if you're a speeder, pay a little bit more for your speeding ticket. The cost of the average motorist of those by year 5 in the governor's plan would have been about $2 a week, much less.
$2 a week?
A week in year 5. We started off about 80 cents a week in year 1, built up to $2 a week by year 5. Okay. The Senate proposal would have started off at a little higher, maybe $1.25 a week, and built to $2.50 a week by year 3. So, the reality is under either plan, you're talking about less than the price of 1 gallon of gas. Now, in your region, how many hours a week, how many gallons of fuel is being wasted while people are sitting in congestion because we're not able to do anything about it? How much money is being spent on wear and tear on cars, on the bad pavement surfaces, by companies who have to drive around weight-restricted bridges? Even if you don't drive, the price of the agriculture products coming from the farm to market costs more because they have to go around weight-restricted bridges. So there's a hidden cost here of doing nothing that government is deciding for you.
Right.
So we either charge you to fix the problem or we charge you to not fix it in a different way. And the cost of fixing is much less than the cost of inaction.
Right. Now, you mentioned down in my region, down in southeastern Pennsylvania. I know down there Rob Wunderling, who leads the Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, is a tremendous supporter of these transportation initiatives. What type of response have you had around the state in terms of who supports these proposals or these initiatives in general? Well,
I think, Representative, you're hitting on a key thing. There's a major Chamber of Commerce, and you see it, like when the Senate introduced their bill, you saw the Chambers of Commerce, business community, Pennsylvania manufacturing, standing beside labor, standing beside school districts, standing beside agriculture, emergency service providers. All these users of the system recognize that if it's not invested in properly and taken care of, that there's a cost to them. And the chambers in particular are very concerned about our ability to attract and retain companies in the state, manufacturing, agricultural, even folks who are employers that are looking for their employees to come via mass transit. Those employers are concerned about our lack of investment. Other states, Maryland, Virginia, Ohio, have recently passed transportation investment plans. So we're competing with those states. We're in the same geographic region. Companies are looking at infrastructure as part of their decision making. And people like Rob Wunderling and other chambers of commerce around the state unanimously support this because they realize the economic impact it would have on Pennsylvania.
So in a nutshell, we have more structurally deficient bridges than anyone else in the country, is that right?
Fortunately, lead the nation. We have over 4,000 structurally deficient bridges, down from 6,000. We have made a move on that. But the move downward on structurally deficient bridges has been at the expense of our roadway surfaces. We put, of the available money we've had, we've said we're going to put more into bridges because that's a bigger safety issue than pavement. And yet that's also a safety issue.
Sure. And we've got 2 proposals out there, one that would cost about $2 a week, and another one that would cost about $2.50 a week for the average driver?
By year five, okay, not initially.
Sure.
Ramping up from where we are today, that by year five, $2 or $2.50 a week.
So at its highest level, the cost is $2.50 a week,
Right.
or $2 a week. And of course, you know, that bill is over in the House, and we look forward to taking that up here in the fall and addressing a lot of these issues that you've highlighted. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me here today. That's all the time we have for today's program. If you have any questions about what you've seen or you need assistance with any state matter, please contact me at my local office. That information will be available on your screen in a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join me next time for another edition of Legislative Report.